Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Instructor Presentations. Can you hear me? Yay. My name is Anna Koblick. I'm going to be your host tonight. So if you haven't been here before, kind of what's going to happen is all the instructors who are here for the week are going to come up, going to give a 10-minute presentation about their work. They're all going to be introduced by their assistant or fellow, and then I'm going to talk about stuff that's pretty cool. So thanks everyone for being here on Zoom. I'm going to start tonight off. I was bullied into telling jokes because I've got great friends. All right, what do you call a fish with no eyes? A yeah. All right. Great. So that was real fun. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna have Wyatt come up here, the fine metals assistant, to introduce our first instructor. Oh. That one. Oh.
All right, hi everybody. My name is Wyatt. I'm the fine metals assistant, and I'm here to introduce Maureen. Maureen Duffy is a jewelry designer, artist, and teacher from South Philadelphia. Maureen received her MFA from SUNY New Paltz and her BFA from Moore College of Art and Design. She currently teaches at Tyler School of Art, Townsend University, Rowan University, Fleischer Art Memorial. She shows and sells her work nationally at multiple galleries and craft shows, including the PMA. Some fun facts about Maureen is she raises prize-winning chinchillas and has 151 tattoos. Please help me in welcoming Maureen.
Let's go ahead to share screen. Okay. All right, you're all set.
Ooh. All right. Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Maureen. So I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to zip through them fast so I make the 10 minutes. I'm starting with this work. It feels a little silly because it's old. I mean, not silly, but it's older work. It's from my graduate time at New Paltz in 2007. But it is the start to like where all of my current work has been going and kind of where it was born from. So when I was at New Paltz, I was kind of like, I was born and raised in Philadelphia, or raised outside Philadelphia, but then went there for undergrad. And then went to graduate school in the middle of the woods and was like, oh, I miss the city so much. So started looking at things that were important to me and how I could take my photos that I would take around the city and kind of incorporate those into the jewelry world, looking at those as what represents us around us, like the things that we surround ourselves around, the architecture, and then bringing it to wearable and what that means. So combining city life into these wearable objects. So the Bell Atlantic, which we don't see anymore. And then also kind of creating these like post-apocalyptic things, like if the world ended, these like pieces of the world that we wear and take with us. So they were large scale, fabricated, functional, non-functional pieces. The side of a telephone booth, mailbox, chain link fence, the beware sign. So, and each piece I like to like add in my own secret, like little meaning behind it. And then, but for the viewer, I just want you to take whatever it means to you. So like the chain link fence being on the back with the beware sign, things like that. And there's that show. That was my graduate show. Drug in 250 cinder blocks to build each of those pedestals. They were not happy about me pulling cinder blocks in the eye. Anyway, but it worked out. So then I moved back to Philadelphia. This is not from like 2008, 2009, but it's a more recent one. But I started trying to figure out what I was going to do with this degree. It was during the recession. I had one kid at the time. I'd moved to upstate New York with his dad, and my son, who was 9 months, came back. He was about 2.5, and was like, what am I going to do with this degree? I have this metalsmithing degree. I was making mostly sculptural pieces. We lived in a little row home, and I was like, how do I take my sculptures and make them smaller and work inside a little walk-in closet in a row home? And so I started just playing around with jewelry making, but I was like, you know, I was kind of jumping all over the place, making things that I thought would sell. And then stopped doing that and really looked at like what I was interested in, start looking at my photographs again. I was taking all these pictures of abandoned bicycles, and I had a whole wall of photos of these abandoned bicycles from around Philadelphia and New York City. And I was like, what can I do with these? Which then led into this whole series of abandoned bicycle carcass necklaces, which was surprising to me. I thought they were like a little strange. Like, I mean, I love them, but I was like, no one's going to buy these. And it was like 2008, 2009, 2010, and all the indie markets got really big, and Renegade in Brooklyn, Renegade Chicago, Art Star Craft Bazaar in Philadelphia. There was all these really big indie markets that popped up, and I was getting into all them and selling out of these necklaces like crazy. So I was like, oh, I think I like hit something. So I ran with that for a long time. And then I was like, okay, can't just keep, and I had other things going on. It's like, I can't just keep making abandoned bicycles and things. So I started looking at my other photographs, which was a lot of chain link fence, the holes in chain link fence, distorted, a lot of wrought iron, just things that caught my eye as I was walking around the city. And so I combined those. And I was trying to toggle back and forth between doing gallery shows and doing these indie craft shows. So then I started jumping back and forth between it and do, you know, higher end gallery work to doing things that were faster pace, which then they kind of became one at some point. Brick walls. And so looking at all the urban textures and landscape, using the things that are thought of as protection. So like brick walls, chain link fences, wrought iron, things that are either thought of as protection or to keep people out, keep people in or keep people out. And what happens when they're distorted. And bringing these things that we don't think of typically when you're walking around as like beautiful, especially chain link fences, think of as beautiful, but then when the patterns taken and brought into jewelry form and manipulated, that they can be brought up into something that is beautiful. At least I think they are. So this, so I kind of, all of the photos I chose, I made a ton of jewelry, all different, all within the same language. There was a clear one. I guess it was just the photos. All within the same language, but playing around with the patterns in different forms. At this point, I feel like in my career, I realized like I kind of just, and maybe the whole way through, it's like you learn things about yourself as you go. I've just realized that I just kind of make along like what I feel I'm inspired to make at that moment. I can't force something. So if I don't feel like working with chain link fence for, I don't know, 6 months, I don't even look at it. And I'll go to wrought iron and you'll see some of the stuff, but all within the same visual language and all with ideas and things that coming with like different meanings that I put into it, but then visually, I just want people to take away what they want from it. So all these little container rings. And so I'll sit down, totally old school. I should get an iPad Pro and start learning how to use the pen, but still old school with the light table and tracing what I want from it. And then, so then the production line within this stuff. So this other series, this was more still in the gallery work that all went to Boston a while ago. And then I was like, okay, I want to incorporate this work into production work and started figuring out designs that were slightly faster, but still, I mean, they're still time consuming with the piercing. And I'm using the same English, so rings, bringing in the rings, pendants, hoops, dangles, trying to push the boundaries. And then this, combining both the chain link and the brick wall, adding stones for colors. And then into the wrought iron pieces. So starting to use those. These ones are in the American, both of these are in the American section of the Philadelphia Museum currently. School. Again, I'm gonna speed during this. So this is kind of like a combination of the production work and gallery work. So again, still using the same patterns and just looking like I take, I don't know, a million photos when I'm out walking around every day of the city, all the chain that hangs off fences, off poles. Started playing with that in it. This is the severed chain series. So instead of it just being like a typical chain all linked together, everything is distressed so that it has that feeling of worn away, like something that was left behind, something that's used. Just a picture of the bench when I'm in production mode. And then this kind of is like a separate line. It was a separate line, but I feel like I never include it in any presentation I ever do, but yet I wear it all the time. And people are always like, oh my God, I love your pendant. I love your pendant. I love your necklaces. And I never show it as like part of my body of work, but it informs all of my work. And it represents me. Traditional tattoos. So this was a separate line that I was doing alongside of my Maureen Duffy jewelry line, which was this tattoo line called the Old Anchor and Chain, which now I just meshed into one. So it was all these traditional tattoo inspired pieces. And again, I realized I was like, as a maker, I have to be doing something that I want to be doing at the moment, or I don't. Am I almost time? Oh, I only think. Okay, I'm going to zip through it. All right, so thank you. All right, so this was a whole series of that, which then started combining the two of them and bringing them together. I'll skip really fast to the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, I was like, what do I want to do? So I got kind of sick of piercing. And so I started carving like crazy, which led me into the Signet collection. And then into this, I needed something humor, like to laugh about. And I went into this whole distressed emotions, distressed look, distressed money. This whole series. All right, at time. Okay. And back into the wrought iron piece. Now I feel like I'm playing through. Back into the wrought iron series. So bouncing around. And then the piece that is in the gallery currently, which is the wrought iron breastplate. So that's kind of where I'm headed now. I got some of the silliness out of my system, which I love that whole series of the distress emotions. But now I'm like thinking of big giant protection pieces with all of the work that I've been working on. And there's nothing being silly. And the last thing is I just went to Guadalajara and Mexico City and took like a million photos. They have so much wrought iron there. It was unbelievable. And it's all painted over. So now my brain's like exploding with ideas. So anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, all right, so next up, we have Lindsay coming up to introduce our photo instructor.
Alrighty, so our photo instructor this week is Joe Guerriero. He is a professional photographer with a main focus in documentary photography. He has completed international photo projects from Pakistan, Turkey, Cuba, and China. This week he is teaching the photo story, so please welcome him up here.
Okay, so because I'm teaching a class on photo story, I thought I would show you a photo story that I did back in 1993. So 1993 was the height of the Bosnian War, if anyone knows about the Bosnian War. It was sort of like what's happening now with Russia and Ukraine. So a writer friend of mine and I were asked by the Air Force to go over to Ramstein Air Force Base and pick up a bunch of wounded Bosnian soldiers. So before we went there, we got on the phone at the airport and called Life magazine, asked if they were interested in the story. So they said they might be interested in seeing when we got back, and they also suggested that maybe we find one particular subject, an interesting subject to follow. So we went there, and there were a lot of subjects, but this one guy in the middle here named Darko, the more we learned about him, I knew that he would be our subject. He was He had his hand blown off in the war. He wasn't even a soldier. If you know about the Bosnian War, people were just being attacked in their houses, basically. He lived in the city, and Serb army was just going around, just cleansing the place of Muslims, mostly Muslims. They were also fighting against Croats. It was a mixed city, and he was mixed Croat, Serbian, Muslim. He was like everything, which a lot of people were at the time in Sarajevo. So he had to go out with a bunch of his friends to protect his family. So they went up into the hills, and he saw this thing on the ground, looked like a bell, he sort of described it, and he touched it, and it was like a cluster bomb, blew his hand off. So Darko was, he was a budding musician. He was a budding rock star, basically, in Sarajevo at the time. And this was his band. He had a few bands at this time. He was all over the radio. He was becoming really famous. And then the war came. And like a lot of wars, people just have to leave or something happens. Everything just gets destroyed. So we decided to follow him, came back to the States, and went to Washington, D.C., lived with a Croatian family for about a month. A bunch of doctors donated their time to give him a prosthesis. He didn't know what a prosthesis would be like. He expected to come to the United States and have this bionic hand where he would be like perfect. So he was very disappointed. You know, the doctors are showing him things like this, and he was just like, what, he was realizing how bad this was going to be. He was very angry. And he also had PTSD. He would jump at the sound of, loud sounds. And they showed him this. So this is the one he ended up getting. But he just had this sort of look about him most of the time down there in Washington, D.C. So he ended up getting his prosthetic arm, put it on for the first time. He just couldn't get the feel of it. He also had an operation on his sinuses while he was by the hospital. And he just wasn't into the prosthesis thing. And also, because he was a mixed ethnic, he couldn't go back. They wanted to send him back after he got his prosthesis. He really couldn't go back, so he wanted to get asylum. So he didn't know anybody, and it was just me and this writer. I invited him to my house in New Jersey. My wife and I accepted him in for he lived with us for about 6 months. We got him a lawyer with pro bono work, got him asylum. Took him to New York City for his first time. He was just totally he was like in heaven. He was really kind of forgetting about his bad things behind him. It was like New York was, because he was a rock star. He wanted to be back on stage. This was kind of funny because he lost his hand on Christmas Eve. And he calls it his happy hand day. He has a strange sense of humor. So my wife made him his hand cake on Christmas Eve. Here he's reading his first letter from home. Obviously, this is before emails and all that stuff. So this is the first time that he was getting anything from his family. But he was just trying to do things normally as if he had a hand, basically, and he's shooting pool, and when they had to do that. But he just kept going. He got his prosthesis, he put a glove on it, because he always did things a little bit differently. He wrote fake hand on it. That's his sense of humor. He was very proud of the American thing. This is really a real immigration story that kind of worked. He loves this country. So he played the drums. So he started taping his drumstick onto his stump. And after practicing a little bit, I introduced him to some musicians that I knew, and I said, yeah, he's good enough. He can get a band. So he ended up getting into a couple of bands. And he was I remember the first time I took him to the studio in New York City. I rented a studio for him just to go play the drums because he just wanted to just get it out, and he just did it. He just let it all out. He's expressed himself. He's a born musician. Played piano. He decided that he was kind of proud of his, of his stump. So he got a tattoo. He said, if people are going to look at it, I'll give them something to look at. So that's why he got a tattoo. And this is the day that he got his political asylum. He's just genuine. Another one of the great social programs we have is here. He got enrolled into this social program for clerical studies because he had done a little bit of clerical work back in Sarajevo. So they taught him how to do payroll, accounting, things like that. So he started looking for a job in New York City. Which was totally different for him, but he was just trying to do whatever he had to do. He didn't complain about anything. But his happiest place is being on stage, and here he is kind of doing his thing, cameras around him. He's got his roll of duct tape with him all the time. He also plays guitar. He tapes a pick onto his stump, plays bass guitar. And he's just he also has a couple bands right now. He plays in a couple of bands. He's the head of payroll at a law school in Brooklyn. This is the day that he got his citizenship. This is several years later. This is probably about 10, 11 years after he first came here. And here he is today. It was his idea to take this picture. This is how he is. And always with the American thing. He's real. And here he is with his family. He ended up marrying former secretary to the president of Bosnia. Has 2 kids. And here we are, his wife, my wife, and her mother, and me down there. This was just last year. So I call this like a really successful immigration story, and he's pretty much made it. He's, living the American dream. So that's it. Love you, Kevin.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, oh, you're doing that, I'm sorry. Cool. All right, thank you very much. Up next, Amelia will be introducing our fibers instructor. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am Amelia Stern, the Fibers Assistant, here to introduce Kachina Leigh. She is a nationally recognized fiber artist and educator. She has participated in a variety of educational programs that have enabled her to study textiles in Bahrain, Japan, Mexico, Qatar, South Africa, Turkey, and numerous countries in Europe. She has shared her love of shibori throughout the United States and most recently through a series of workshops in Oaxaca, Mexico. Please help me in welcoming Kachina Leigh.
So, hello, yes, my name is Kachina, and if you are seeing any of the other ladies tonight with stains upon them, it is because they are in my workshop. So as a shibori artist, I get a lot of questions about what the difference is between tie-dye and shibori. And the sort of quick and easy answer, I think, is that, tie-dye we associate with really, really bright colors. We associate with the movement of the 1960s, peace and love. Whereas shibori is a much different approach to a way to create a resist on a garment. The goddess of shibori, as I like to call her, is Yoshika Wada. And I hate when anyone in any type of presentation reads to me from the slides. So I'm not going to read to you because that's what every administrator ever does to me. I think what's so incredible about shibori is that it's a way of taking fabric, binding it, holding it, transforming it. And I love what she refers to as the idea later in her book, the idea of memory on cloth. So the cloth records everything that is done to it. On the right is an example of shibori. On the left is an example of batik. Both of them use resist. Here in batik, you're looking at an example of wax that's been laid down and then, it's been put into a red dye bath. Then more wax is laid down, put into, like a yellow dye bath. Whereas shibori, everything is done by stitching and pulling, or taking the fabric and wrapping and binding it. And again, as you can see from the example at the top and then the image at the bottom, I forget that it's up here. I keep gesturing back there. Sorry, we're not this fancy at my high school. So this is like, there's a lot going on here. But you can see that the fabric remembers how it has been bound. So here are two examples of my work. I primarily work with wearables. I think that there's something really incredible about making something that someone else chooses to wear, that they choose to put on their body, and that, it lives with them. So the work on the left is work in silk, and the work on the right is a piece in wool. For my students who are here this evening, this is a type of shibori called arashi shibori, which is storm. And that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow, where instead of using, the Japanese would use bamboo, we're going to be using PVC piping. We're going to take pieces of fiber that we've already dyed, and we are going to be wrapping it around a pole and then sort of pushing it down, again, creating a sense of pattern. I have done a lot of work with the Textile Museum in Oaxaca, Mexico. And I became really interested in these forms that would be created when you would pull the stitching really tight. They became really sculptural and they sort of spoke to me. And so I created this series, 18 by 24, which are the two pieces in the gallery that are currently on view. And so in my studio, which is in the Goggle Works, which is in Reading, Pennsylvania, it's a converted goggle factory. And I had a lot of invitations to do things because people thought it was Google. And then they were like, oh, it's the Goggle Works. Yeah, no, we're really not interested in you, but that's okay. I still think my work is great. So I took these pieces and I used the same size cloth and did a series of different kinds of stitching on them. I worked with a photographer to have him photograph the pieces. And then I took them to Oaxaca. Indigo grows in a lot of different places, but it grows in Mexico. And what was so special for me was that I got an opportunity to meet some of the farmers who had actually grown the indigo. See, that's what I'm used to, those types of interruptions. So we're good. So it was really an honor because these individuals from a very rural area had not ever really traveled far outside of that area, and the ability to take this grass, this plant that grows, and actually turn it into something that you can create, and actually color fabric with, was really amazing. So I took these pieces to Oaxaca and I worked with a master dyer who then taught me a lot about indigo, which I'm also going to be sharing with my students. And this is one of those pieces. As I said to you, one of the things that Yoshiko Wada talks about with shibori is this idea of memory on cloth. And I think one of the things, if I were to sort of talk about all of my work, I'm very interested in memory. And as a high school teacher, I constantly feel tragically unhip, and I don't know what is sort of going on. And I don't understand, you know, like the interest in social media with the Facebook and the Instagram. I have an Insta, now I'm cool, still don't get Snapchat, but whatevs. So I decided for a year, because it just really ticked me off, to begin to record my day every day. I made 366 different small pieces of fabric. Each one measures 5 by 7. And, you know, I used pieces from, you know, prior experiences where, you know, like that seemed like the perfect piece of fabric to talk about November 29th, when I got stuck for 3 hours in a policy committee meeting. The work from September 17th, 2012 is an example of shibori. So over the course of that year, I made 366 small pieces, and I'm actually preparing for a show where I'm revisiting those pieces. I had them photographed and I had them laser printed, and now I'm revisiting them by going over them and using them as a basis for a collage. What I've been doing most currently is a lot of work having to do with the history of my family. My family is originally from Nebraska. I can trace my roots back all the way back to Sweden through multiple generations. And in the black and white picture on the right, you see my great-great-grandmother who's seated. And to her left is my great-grandmother Anna. And to her right is my grandmother Mildred. And on her lap is my aunt Bernadine. My mother came along next, and then her sister Signe. They had a homestead in Camel, Nebraska, down a minimum maintenance road, which all of you being around here are super familiar with. And I created 3 dresses to commemorate the women in that photograph. I did one for my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my paternal grandmother. And we no longer own the land, so I had to ask the man who owns the land and sort of explain to this wonderful, gentle man why I wanted to set my work up in what is now a pasture, because nothing exists. And for me, that was really heartbreaking, because I had visited the site about 15 years ago, and there still were some buildings and things like that. And now the house in which my grandmother, my mother were both born, like there's nothing there. And so creating these pieces was sort of a way to come to terms with that sense of loss. And my goal is to keep them out there all year. The cows are a lot more curious and a little bit unkind to my work. And I would definitely say, you know, being from the Northeast part of the United States, growing up there, I'm really unfamiliar with how tremendously different the weather is in Nebraska. So here's how they looked in the winter, this spring, and last week was day 244. The mannequins have completely collapsed. Something has eaten all the beads off of my Saint Anna dress, and something is definitively feeding on the bottom of the dress dedicated to my grandmother. But my grandmother was always a staunch and supportive woman, and she is the one piece that is still standing. So I take some heart in that. And I will be taking the pieces down in November. So those are some things I'm currently working on. So thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for listening.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Logan to introduce our ceramics instructor.
Hello. I'm introducing Ben Owen III. Ben Owen III is an American studio potter working in Seagrove, North Carolina. Born into a traditional pottery family, he was first introduced to clay by his grandfather when he was 8 years old. Since then, he's continued to advance his craft and is now teaching the making work for and the firing of the Anagama kiln, those 2 workshops here at Peters Valley. Ben is a wealth of knowledge. It's so great to have him in the studio. I'm so excited for the workshops coming up. So help me welcome Ben Owen III.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and all the staff and everyone, what you're doing to make this happen. It's really wonderful. And our first day in the studio has been really, we've accomplished quite a bit, I think. So we jumped in and started with some small vessels and working with it from there, and just really, I can see a lot of potential what's going to happen over the next few days. So with that being said, I'll tell you a little bit about the background of my, I'll turn it up a little bit there. I guess I'm kind of tall for this. So, the background, as Logan was mentioning, our family has been involved with clay. To expand on that a little bit, clay, of course, has been a big part of central North Carolina, as well as Catawba Valley, more the foothills we would call of the North Carolina area. And there are other smaller pockets like in Alamance County, which is north more between Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and Greensboro areas. But clay is abundant in our region. And I bring this up because a lot of people see clay on the side of the road, or I'll have customers come and visit and they say, well, gosh, I have clay in my backyard. Do you need some? And I'm like, well, it depends on what type of clay it is. So I bring, actually, yeah, this one I bring up to show people some of the earliest forms of accounting and writing have been made on clay tablets. So these are some from Samaria. Some of the tablets that were made, they were made a new one each year out of clay. They would never fire them, but they would keep them damp, and they would mark all their accounting for their crops on the tablet. At the end of the year, they would finish up their accounting, and then they would dissolve it and reassemble it back into a new tablet for the coming year. So pretty cool, some of the earliest ways of documenting how we do accounting and writing in clay. If you see the state of North Carolina, we're in the central area, more where the white pockets are in the orange area. So there's a lot of veins or pockets of clay that are formed in that area over a long period of time. So some really cool geological formations of pockets or veins of clays have been placed there. And through our family, we trace back to the mid to late 1700s, families coming to the South, and they found the good land to work with farming, support their family. But at the same time, they were able to take and work with the ones that had the skills. A lot of them learned up here in the Northeast. Our earliest family member we've traced back, it was John Owen. Before coming to America, he was in New London, Connecticut, and he was a tailor. So he made clothing, but his son, James Owen, moved, and he's the first one to live in our area where we live today. So many of the materials that we work with in the area, of course, comprise of some of the different types of colors or qualities of the clays. These being more earthenware type materials. They were more surface type clays that were found. You didn't really have to dig far down below the topsoil, and you could find the red clays, and they were plastic enough to stay together to form a vessel, whether it's for making something to bake beans or serve at the dinner table, or even for candlelight. So the influences of the type of pieces they made were early American influences through the colonies coming in, but also there was a lot of influence from looking at other cultures, other styles and techniques. The candlesticks are more from a more Middle Eastern influence, more from Syria, and other influences that you could see for the types of candle holders. My grandfather was one of the first generations of our Owen family to really make a living and work as a career as a potter. So with that, what I'm saying is before, when my great grandfather Rufus Owen and Franklin Owen and then J.J. Owen and back to James, they just made the things out of necessity. But my granddad was taken in by a couple who saw art as a way of a survival for potters in our community. This is taking place in the early 1900s when Prohibition, as well as Industrial Revolution and other influences, played a big factor in the local mom and pop kind of potters that were making work just to support. And they did a lot of bartering with basket makers, weavers, and other people in the community, and they would support each other. So it was really a great network. But at that time, in the early 1900s, potters either had to go work in another occupation or another trade, maybe a carpenter or other skills. And from that, they were able to retool and go to museums and look at forms from other cultures. These are sketches that my grandfather and the Busbys that created eventually a pottery called Jugtown pottery. They looked at forms from Middle Eastern and continued to research in those areas, some of the vessels and water jars. And then a dominant amount of it was from more Southeast Asia. So a lot of the work from Japan from the 1700s, Edo period, and even earlier, Tang Dynasty, Han Dynasty, and so on. And they would emulate or recreate some of these shapes. This is a piece on the left that I have from the Han Dynasty in our collection. And the piece on the right was made in the 1930s by my grandfather. So you can see how they were kind of imitating the forms, but then they began to expand some of the colors and using the vessel as a way of almost like putting clothing on the clay vessel. So thinking about color and design and how it would become more of an art form than just a vessel to hold flowers or to hold grain. My early influence, as was mentioned, came through my grandfather, just spending time with me and really giving me an opportunity to learn more why we had so many pots on our shelves. I'll never forget, I was 10 years old one time, and Joan Mondale came to visit my grandfather at our house. And my parents pulled me out of school and I said, well, we have somebody special visiting, you need to meet them. And so I was like, wow, okay. I was more interested in the guys with all the Secret Service stuff outside and all the things they had. But anyway, it was pretty cool that Joan Mondale was a potter as well. So, but the influences of what he did, he spent a lot of time after school and weekends with me working on the wheel. And I started selling my work when I was not even 12 years old in the shop. And I was making a pretty good living making pots as a young kid. So it really expanded my time. I spent time in college at East Carolina University. Before that, I spent a couple of years studying business at Pfeiffer College, which is a local private school. I taught pottery classes along the way while I was there. But when I was out of college from ECU, studying more of the science and the physics as well as the design element, I took an opportunity to do a fellowship in Japan where I could make work, be immersed with the potters in that village. So I spent a summer working with a lot of historical potters coming from many generations like my family, but learning what they do in their village there as well. So it was really a wonderful opportunity to be able to make pots and then be able to fire the wood kilns with them at the same time. Back in our community in Seagrove, this is one of the geological maps. The FF in the center and that whole vein of clay through the center pretty much takes up the whole town and our whole community where we live. And that is mostly stoneware clay, more of a gray type of clay that holds up to a really high temperature. So I really got into not only the the design and the elements of making pots, but I love the science side of it too. This is another clay pit where we go and dig clay. This is a primary kaolin that we dig, and it works really well for especially high temperature in the wood kiln. So a lot of the colors and the minerals we try to bring out of the materials and bring more warmer tones or color qualities to the vessels that come out of the kiln. Some of my fellow potters will go out and dig clay. This was one little pocket about 1.5 feet thick, and it was some of the most sticky clay I've ever seen. And it was just a small pocket. We dug as much as we could out, and we still continue to use a little bit of it as a slip for a coloring agent on pots. But it's kind of like a secret fishing hole in some ways. You find materials and then you try to take advantage of those materials when you can. But the type of pieces I make, I continue in the same lines of what my grandfather made with simple lines, strong forms. Recent years, I've been making these kind of pierced forms, thinking about the vessel instead of making a vessel that's solid or contained, thinking about piercing the surface and actually letting things of the vessel come out, or how do we emulate things through the vessels other than a pouring vessel or a covered jar. But some of these I take and illuminate with lights inside of them as kind of like an outdoor piece or indoors. But these are fired in my Onigama kiln, very similar to what we have here at Peters Valley. And I can stack multiple layers throughout the kiln. These pots are about 4 foot tall, as you see in here, this photo. But the firing process that we do compared to my forefathers, they would heat the work up with wood like those early earthenware pots that were bright orange. Those were fired all in wood kilns. But today, the techniques that I've experienced over the last several decades is more from taking the kiln up over a period of time and then soaking and holding it. It's almost the difference when I tell people, a customer comes in, well, why do we have to wait so long till you have enough to fire in the wood kiln? Well, it's the difference in asking a chef to make a pizza or make brisket. So it's just really a wonderful way of kind of creating color and effect on the surface. We have a 4-chambered wood kiln, and we fire more zone control. So it's kind of like the chamber kiln here at Peters Valley as well. Some of the colors and effects, more of the natural ash. We use mostly hardwood to create the colors and effects on the pot on the left. The pot on the right is a cobalt glaze with adding more magnesium and other elements to create crystals and the ash byproducts. These are more of the iron glazes I use, and you can see over a long period of time the ash that's building up on the surface, and being able to allow the ash to build up over a long firing process and then overlap the glazes and create design or pattern. These are paddled into an oval shape, and that's one of the types of shapes we're making for this firing, thinking about how we take a form and place it in the kiln and how the flame will travel through the whole duration of the firing. Some of the work I make, about 30 to 40% of my time, I make custom work or commission work for designers and architects. So over the years, I've built a relationship making work for interior designers. So I make a lot of custom work. This is a hotel back in home in Cary, North Carolina, the Umstead Hotel. If you go in Boston, I've made a lot of work in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, and I've done about 9 Ritz-Carlton hotels over the world. So as far as different places, they have custom work they want in a lobby or a particular piece. So I work with them on the design, thinking about the colors and how they're going to relate to the shapes that will make really a comfort setting in the space. So some of these are taller, like 4-foot bottles I made for this restaurant. And just thinking about the colors they use for the walls and then what type of colors we could bring out of the pieces during the firing. Last but not least, my wife, Lori Ann, is on the left. She does custom design and etching with a CO2 laser system. She helps me with my business also. Our son, Benjamin, 16, he makes pots like I did as a kid, and he's been making pots for a long time. Avery in the middle, she's a full-time forest ranger, so she helps landowners with managing forests and control burns and all kinds of details with the forest. And Juliana, beside me, she's in school at Boston College and studying business in the Carroll Business School right now. So, but thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And last but not least, we have Sean coming up here to introduce our blacksmithing instructor.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean. I'm the blacksmith assistant. I'm here to introduce James Viste, who's teaching a vessels and steel class this week. James learned blacksmithing accidentally at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse. As a fluke, he studied blacksmithing at the Cranbrook Academy for the Arts. Then by chance, he became the full-time technician for all crafts at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. He promptly left that position after 23 years of service to open his own studio in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, and he's here helping us out this week. And please welcome James.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for Peters Valley for allowing me to come out here yet again to this wonderful studio, the best dirt floor in the whole United States of America. I love it. So from the snowy tundra of Wisconsin, I recently drove here to New Jersey. It's a long hike. I used to be in Detroit for a long time, and that was a much easier drive. But I've been working on a shop in Wisconsin for a while. I did it in secret for a while so nobody would know. That's the best way to build a studio when you don't want anybody to know about it, is keep it a secret. My original training or work in metal smithing, mainly blacksmithing, but jewelry and fine metals too, was in Damascus or pattern welded steel under the tutelage of Bill Fiorini in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I accidentally took a metal smithing class and ended up sticking with it. This is a early from a series of plumb bobs, just showing the nature of the layered material. It's layers of different types of steel, but when it's turned on a lathe, just like wood, it's got grain. Can be forged and manipulated in just about any form. This is a simple raising hammer. Bill was a knife maker, so of course we all gravitated to making knives. I still make knives. These are current knives, not from back then, but current knives I only do on commission. I don't make knives on speculation. It's just not a field that I have the ability to pursue heavily enough to make speculative knives. So I only do commissions and occasional donations or pieces for friends. This one is, I make my handle material. The majority of I make out of found materials. This is actually what's called Fordite, which is scraped off the walls of the spray booths in the Ford factories. So it's layers and layers of Ford paint. I do knives again on commission, some in series, some are individual based. So just to throw in a couple of those out. Cleavers, more involved patterns. This is what I call a revolver pattern. So it's actually made, the blade is like an Oreo cookie when you first forge it, and then you forge it out of that with 2 layers of pattern on the side of the cream filling, which is the tool steel in the middle. Different variations on that. That's something I just started doing last year. Again, the handles are all found materials. I also do architectural ironwork and architectural ironwork restoration, mainly for museums. This was a fireplace set for an Eldon Dow house in Michigan. Eldon Dow was a modernist designer. The owner of the house was a huge collector of African art. So without the African art, the fireplace does not fit in the modernist house at all. I look forward to when he decides to move to see what he says he's going to do with the fireplace. Architectural stuff, fabrication work. These are some big, these were driveway gates, and there's a matching pedestrian gate, all out of sheet metal to match the finger brickwork, this in brick on the house. I hope everybody got that. This was a partial restoration, partial remake railing job for the big museum in Detroit Institute of the Arts. Part of it was recovered from a contractor who lost the rest of it. And so from pictures, I got to remake all of it. And I tell you one thing about installing stair railings, it sucks. Because all you do is run up and down stairs. Now this week is a vessel class, so I wanted to emphasize the vessel in the work that I do. I started working in this direction many years ago in both the bowl or platter or fruit bowl type form, and then in actually lidded containers, all of them with function. The majority of them can be cooked in. They're lined with either a copper and tin liner or a steel tin liner. So they are fully functional and can be cooked in. Mimicking other materials. So like this is one of a series of plates where I'm trying to make the steel look like it's leather. Sometimes I'll actually do like shoe polish finishes on them to really make the surface like completely elusive. I had a background in clay and a lot of friends in clay, so I tried to mimic some clay work. My glazed surface is what's called room temperature enamel. It's either Krylon or Rust-Oleum, comes in a can. You just push the little red button on the top. But these I'm using steel, forging it. So these little cellular forms are actually stacks of round bar of steel forged down, and then they conform to each other and make these little cellular forms or wads. I always like to start the actual lidded vessel with this piece, which I made here in my first class at Peters Valley. It's small. It was called a stash vessel. Now these days I don't know what a stash is classified at, but I always say this at the time was about the right size. It was funny. This spring we found in the shop a rusted out piece of metal, which was the original lid for this vessel that didn't turn out. So this is the one I was talking about to the class today. It was laying down in the shop all rusted because it's been sitting in dirt for 22 years. Trying to mimic the feel of a thrown piece, but doing it in steel. This is just flattened out channel iron. A lot of them, again, the enamel painted surface distressed a little bit and then rusted through to bring out the base metal, give kind of a mimic of a clay body. I can't really compete with the last lecture as far as clay bodies go, so I'm not gonna go too far into that. This one I always liked because for some reason I didn't catch the fact it says Canada upside down in the channel iron when I forged that channel iron out. So that's all one continuous piece, 10 feet long of channel iron coiled up and welded together. Bringing the pattern welded steel back into some vessels. So this is actually pattern welded steel wrapped around, not treated like a blade. It's not polished. It's just heavily etched, creating the sort of, it's a river with islands pattern going around this form. Again, leather stitching forms. I refer to most of these as casseroles. They have, like I said, aligners. They're all about that size. If you think of a casserole, they can be cooked in. Either the liner can be cooked in separately and put in, or the whole thing can be put in the oven and worked with. Bringing in jewelry. This is based on a traditional jeweler's tension set ring that holds the stone. So the three flattened out bars come around and grab onto that upset piece of round bar and hold it in place. Some pieces are a little more poetic, more of a story. This is actually based on a stump that they cut down at the school I was at, and it sat in some wet grass all summer, wicking up water into the bottom of the stump, and leaves kept growing out of it all summer like it was still trying to live. So there's a little copper leaf growing out the side of it. I did a whole series based on having grown up on a farm. So these are die forged corn cobs with little tractor tracks hidden within them to kind of represent the field. The base is based on the spokes of an old harvester wheel from like a 1940s combine. The lid is from a cultivating tool called a disc, just one disc cut off. It's actually all made. It isn't from the implement, but it represents that. This one is about celebrating picking stones, which we had to do as a kid. So when you heard you were picking stones, everybody went, huh. And then you walked around a field all day picking stones. So here's a plowed field with stainless steel stones, and at the top on the lid is a big pile of rocks. The inherent plasticity and suppleness of steel when it's soft is really amazing to celebrate in sheet work. So this was another series of vessels just compressing pipe forms to see how it conforms to other forms. So this is the front view of this vessel, and then side view about how soft that material is when it's hot. And then as soon as it's cold, you know, you can chuck it on the floor and you're not going to hurt it. If you do, that's cool too. Same sort of form in a sake service. So here that rod on the bottom comes through, it's a solid, and then pops through and weld in a tube on the other side, and it's a spout, but it's the illusion of coming through and punching out the other side. Exploring other materials, industrial materials. So this is channel iron. Channel iron is shaped like a U. And if you twist that and cut it down the middle, you get these, what I call Spock ears. So, and those are just kind of fabricated on. These are almost fully fabricated forms. A lot of welding, not traditional blacksmithing. I'm not a purist in the least sense of the term. So I had this friend that was an astronaut. And I asked him one time, this is a story. I asked him one time, like, it must be so cool out in space, like so quiet and there's nothing like going on. And he said, oh no, when you're flying, there is so much junk hitting the shuttle. You hear it all the time. So I made this little rickety rocket based on just this sort of waved up woven steel kind of thrown together like it's been through the ringer and it's still kind of going. That's a close-up of that. So that's just steel wire woven in cloth and then forge welded down to the base. I was telling the students today how great steel is in that you can put it down and forget about it for 15 years or think about it, not forget, you're thinking about it for 15 years, then pick it up and go, I have an idea now. So this was actually just steel chain wrapped up in kind of a pizza, welded together. And then I sat on it for like over a decade. And then one day I went, hey, I'm sick of this. I'm going to make something out of it and get rid of it. And that's what it turned out to be. A little sort of thermos. Just the texture in that chain. We're started experimenting a bit today with die forming and repetition in forms. So, whoa, am I that far over already? Jeez, did you go like that? Shoot. Oh, wow. Die forging, I wasn't paying attention. Making individual tiles and fabricating them together into vessels, just a couple more. This is actually forge welded little bits of metal, forge welded down to a piece. Some bottles based on the cracked earth that you showed earlier, or the dried up puddle, you know, the drought. Taking little bits of metal, sticking them together. And to end with, I wouldn't ever suggest anybody as a hoarder, but don't ever forget about the potential of what scrap you have in the bottom of a tin can. Thank you. Sorry for going over that.
Oh, this is how you don't get off that. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Before I let you go, I've been bullied into doing one more joke. Why are skeletons always so calm? No. Because nothing can get under their skin. So on that note, thank you everyone for being here in person, on Zoom. Good night.
Hello and thank you so much for watching this program. Peters Valley would like to thank its sponsors for making programs like this possible. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Peters Valley's channel to receive more like it in the future.